The crystal champagne flute trembled in my hand as my brother Marcus raised his own glass high above the crowd of well-dressed relatives and family friends. The ballroom of the country club sparkled with warm light, casting everything in that golden glow that seemed to follow the Whitman family wherever we went. Everything except me, apparently. "To our successful family," Marcus declared, his voice carrying that same confident timbre that had charmed Harvard admissions officers in corporate boardrooms. His eyes swept across the room, landing briefly on our parents, our sister Catherine, even our cousin David, who'd barely scraped through community college. Then his gaze found me, standing near the back in my dress uniform. Except her. The silence that followed felt like the moment between lightning and thunder. I watched faces turn toward me, some confused, others embarrassed, a few nodding as if they'd been waiting for someone to finally say it out loud. That's when I felt the hand on my shoulder, firm, commanding, unmistakably military. I turned to see General Patricia Hayes, a woman whose reputation preceded her into any room she entered. 3 stars gleamed on her shoulder boards, and her steel gray hair was pulled back in the same severe bun she'd worn throughout her 30-year career. "Your speech, Colonel," she said simply, her voice cutting through the awkward murmur. I stared at her, my mind racing. Speech? What speech? But then I saw it in her eyes. Not confusion, but a steely determination. She wasn't asking me to give a speech. She was ordering me to reclaim my narrative. To understand that moment, you have to understand the Whitman family. We weren't just wealthy. We were legacy wealthy. The kind whose name appeared on hospital wings and university libraries, whose patriarch had his portrait in the courthouse, whose matriarch organized charity galas that made society pages. Marcus had followed the script perfectly. Harvard for undergrad, Wharton for his MBA, then straight into the family business where he'd increased quarterly profits by 30%. He'd married appropriately. Vivian came from old Connecticut money, and they'd already produced 2 beautiful children. Catherine had chosen medicine, graduating summa cum laude from Johns Hopkins, completing residency at Mayo Clinic, and becoming a prominent cardiac surgeon whose patient list read like a who's who of political elite. Then there was me. I'd started following the script. Straight A's at prep school, early admission to Princeton, international relations major good preparation for law school or diplomacy, both acceptable for a Whitman daughter. I was on track when everything changed during my junior year. A guest lecture by a retired Marine colonel who'd served in Desert Storm spoke to something in me I hadn't known existed. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about what would look good on a resume or make my parents proud. I was thinking about what would make me proud. The conversation with my parents didn't go well. "The military?" my mother had said, her voice reaching that particular pitch she reserved for shocking news. "Darling, that's not really something Whitman women do." My father was more direct. "You want to throw away a Princeton education to play soldier? This is clearly some kind of phase." But I'd made up my mind. I finished my degree magna cum laude, naturally, then shocked everyone by enlisting as a second lieutenant instead of pursuing the law degree they'd assumed was next. My first deployment to Iraq came 8 months after officer candidate school. I was 24, green as grass, and terrified I'd bitten off more than I could chew. My platoon was a mix of career soldiers and recruits, and I could see the skepticism in their eyes. Another college kid playing at being a soldier. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez tested me first, a 20-year veteran who approached me with a supply requisition that was clearly inflated. I could have signed it without looking or made a show of authority. Instead, I called him into my tent. "Rodriguez, walk me through this," I said, spreading the requisition on my field desk. "You've been doing this longer than I've been alive. Teach me." What followed was 40 minutes about supply chain logistics, equipment failure rates in desert conditions, and keeping troops equipped in hostile territory. By the end, we'd revised the requisition, and Rodriguez had taught me things they'd never covered at OCS. That conversation set the tone for my entire deployment. I learned to lead by admitting what I didn't know, asking the right questions, treating my soldiers like experts. My platoon had one of the lowest incident rates in our battalion. My family's reaction to my first commendation was mixed. "Well, it's nice that you're being recognized," my mother said during one of our increasingly infrequent calls. "But darling, when are you going to think about your future?" The irony wasn't lost on me. I was thinking about my future, for the first time seeing a path that excited and challenged me. But it wasn't the future they'd imagined, so it didn't count. Forward Operating Base, Chapman in Afghanistan, was where I learned what leadership really meant. As a newly promoted captain, I commanded a company of engineers building and maintaining infrastructure that kept soldiers alive and missions moving forward. The attack came during a bridge replacement project. Mortars started falling just after dawn, sustained and targeted, designed to pin us down. Specialist Torres was hit by shrapnel, not life-threatening but serious enough to need immediate medical attention. The enemy had positioned themselves between us and our vehicles, and medevac couldn't land under fire. Standard protocol was to call for backup and wait for air support. It was the safe choice, the by-the-book choice. It was also the choice that might cost Torres his life. Instead, I grabbed Sergeant Mills and laid out a different plan. We'd use construction equipment to create a distraction while flanking around with Torres. It was risky, it deviated from procedure, and if it went wrong, I'd be responsible. "Ma'am, you sure about this?" Mills had asked, mortars still falling around us. I looked at Torres, conscious but pale, bleeding through field dressing. Then at Mills, a career soldier with a wife and kids back home, asking me to risk his life on a plan I'd sketched in the dirt. "No," I said honestly, "but it's the best chance we've got." 20 minutes later, we reached extraction. Torres was unconscious but stable, and I'd learned the difference between classroom leadership and leadership when lives are on the line. The Bronze Star with Valor Device followed, along with early promotion to Major. When I called home to share the news, my father's response was polite but lukewarm. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Your mother and I are very proud. But Catherine just made partner, and Marcus is being considered for the board. When you're ready to come home and build something lasting, we'll be here." Building something lasting. As if the bridges we'd constructed hadn't carried thousands of tons of supplies. As if the lives we'd saved didn't matter because they couldn't be measured in quarterly profits. By lieutenant colonel, I'd served in 3 combat zones, led infrastructure projects used as case studies at the War College, and earned a reputation for solving problems others considered unsolvable. I'd been selected for Command and General Staff College, the pathway to senior leadership. I'd also been divorced once, dated sporadically, and missed countless family gatherings due to deployments and training. The family's attitude had evolved from disappointed confusion to resigned tolerance. I was the black sheep who'd chosen duty over dynasty. The breakthrough came during my Pentagon assignment, working strategic planning for overseas operations. I was part of a joint task force redesigning logistics protocols when our proposals were rejected as too expensive and risky. I suggested the alternative that became the new standard, a modular system, reducing costs by 40% while improving response times. The commendation was signed by the Defense Secretary himself. When I called home, my father actually seemed impressed. "The Defense Secretary? That's quite an accomplishment. We should celebrate when you're next in town." For a moment, I thought maybe the gap was closing. Maybe they were beginning to understand that what I'd built was just as valuable as my siblings' achievements. That hope made Marcus's toast 6 months later feel like an even sharper betrayal. Marcus's 40th birthday was designed to celebrate everything the Whitman family represented. The country club where our parents had married, where we'd learned tennis and golf, where 3 generations had celebrated milestones and made connections. I'd flown in from Command and General Staff College specifically because Marcus had asked me to be there. "It wouldn't be the same without my little sister," he'd said. "This could be a chance to reconnect." I'd worn my dress blues because he'd requested it. "I want people to see what a distinguished family we are," he'd said. "Your uniform will remind everyone that Whitmans serve their country." At the time, I'd been touched. Looking back, I realize he wanted me as a prop proof of patriotic credentials, without disrupting their narrative of business success. The conversation with Uncle Richard stuck with me most. "You know, Sarah, it's not too late for a career change," he'd said. "Marcus's firm is always looking for people with government experience. Put that Pentagon experience to work in the private sector." I appreciate the thought, but I'm happy where I am. "Happy?" He'd laughed incredulously. "You're 42, living in base housing, driving a 10-year-old car. Marcus just bought his 3rd vacation home. Don't you want more?" That conversation was echoing in my mind when Marcus stood to make his toast. I'd been questioning whether Uncle Richard had a point, whether I'd been too stubborn about alternative paths. Then Marcus raised his glass and reminded me exactly why I'd needed to find my own way. General Hayes' hand on my shoulder felt like an anchor. Patricia Hayes was a legend first woman to command a combat division, architect of major strategic initiatives. She'd faced skepticism about her choices, had her commitment questioned, been told military service wasn't appropriate for someone of her background. The difference was, she'd reached the top when even fewer people understood why a woman would choose service over security. If she thought I belonged here, if she thought my voice mattered enough to demand I use it, then maybe it was time to stop apologizing for who I'd become. I stepped forward, accepting the platform Marcus had inadvertently created. The room fell silent, not uncomfortable awkwardness, but focused attention. "Thank you, Marcus," I began, my voice carrying the confidence I'd used in briefing rooms and command centers. "And thank you all for celebrating with our family tonight." I looked around at faces I'd known since childhood, my parents at the head table, Catherine leaning forward as if trying to telegraph support. Marcus is right about one thing. The Whitman family has been successful by any measure. We've built businesses, served communities, raised families. We have a lot to be proud of. Some tension left the room. Maybe this would be gracious, diplomatic. But I think there are different ways to measure success, I continued, and attention sharpened again. 3 months ago, I implemented a new logistics protocol being adopted across all overseas military operations. It's projected to save over $200 million annually while improving response times. I saw surprise on faces as they realized the scope of what I'd been working on. Last year, I led a task force that redesigned emergency response procedures for base security. The new protocols were tested during the evacuation of forward operating base Mercury in Syria and credited with saving over 300 lives. More facts, accomplishments that had never made family conversations because they weren't traditional Whitman success. 5 years ago, I commanded relief operations in the Philippines after Typhoon Miguel. My team restored power to 6 provinces, established field hospitals treating 12,000 civilians, coordinated aid to 40,000 displaced persons. I could see my father's expression changing as he processed the scale of what I was describing. "I'm not diminishing anyone else's achievements," I said, looking at Marcus and Catherine. "Catherine saves lives daily. Marcus provides livelihoods for hundreds. These are important contributions." I paused, feeling the weight of 18 years of service. But what I do matters too. The bridges my teams build carry supplies that keep soldiers alive. The protocols I've designed protect people who volunteered to serve. These aren't consolation prizes or gap-year adventures. They're the foundation of a career I'm proud of, serving something larger than myself. I raised my glass. So here's to success in all its forms. To building things that matter, whether businesses or bridges, whether measured in profits or lives saved. To family that supports each other's choices, even when we don't understand them. And to Marcus, who's reminded me tonight why I made the choices I did. The room was silent. Then General Hayes began to clap slow, measured applause that others gradually joined. Marcus stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. Anger, embarrassment, maybe surprise that his quiet sister had found her voice exactly when he'd tried to take it away. The rest of the party felt different. People approached with genuinely interested questions about my work. A few of Marcus's associates asked about consulting opportunities. My Pentagon experience looked more impressive once they understood what it involved. Catherine found me during dessert. "That was incredible," she said intensely. "I had no idea the scale of what you do." "Most people don't," I replied. "It doesn't translate easily to civilian conversation." I should have asked. We all should have. We assumed that because you weren't making money like us, you weren't really succeeding. "And that was wrong," she continued after I nodded. "Mom and Dad raised us to think there was only one way to build a meaningful life." My parents found me as the party wound down. Mom looked tired, older. Dad's expression was thoughtful. "We need to talk," Mom said. "Not tonight, but soon. We owe you an apology and the support we should have been giving all along." Marcus was last. He approached as I put on my coat, earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty. "That was quite a speech," he said. "You gave me a good opening." He winced. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. "How did you mean it?" Long silence. "I guess I meant it exactly the way it sounded, and I was wrong." I waited. "I've always been jealous of you," he said, words rushing out. "My whole life, I've done exactly what was expected, followed the laid-out path, checked the right boxes. And you had the courage to walk away and build something entirely your own." That wasn't what I'd expected. I've spent years telling myself you were stubborn, throwing away opportunities, somehow less successful because you weren't accumulating wealth. But tonight, listening to you, I realized I was wrong about everything. He looked up, and I saw the brother I'd grown up with before expectations changed us both. I was wrong about what success means, and I was wrong about you. I'm sorry. 3 weeks later, General Hayes called with an opportunity that would change everything. She was forming a task force to review military promotion and retention policies, particularly for officers from non-traditional backgrounds. I need someone with operational experience, strategic planning background, and personal insight into challenges facing officers who don't fit conventional molds, she'd said. Your name came up. The task force spent 3 months examining institutional culture, asking fundamental questions about how the military identified and developed leadership talent. We discovered the military was full of innovative officers who were hitting career ceilings, not from lack of ability, but because they didn't fit traditional advancement patterns. My contribution focused on alternative career paths, arguing the military needed to create advancement opportunities for officers whose value came from specialized knowledge rather than conventional command experience. The recommendations were comprehensive: revised promotion criteria, mentorship programs, retention bonuses for critical specializations. When we briefed Pentagon leadership, I presented the most controversial section to the Defense Secretary himself. "Colonel Whitman, these are significant changes. What makes you confident they'll improve leadership development?" "Sir, we're already losing talented officers because they don't see advancement paths that value their contributions. These recommendations aren't about lowering standards. They're about expanding our definition of excellence for modern warfare." The briefing led to a pilot program across 3 major commands. It was policy impact most officers never influenced, institutional change affecting military careers for decades. 6 months after Marcus's party, I was selected for promotion to full colonel in command of the 82nd Engineering Brigade at Fort Bragg. The promotion ceremony felt like vindication of every choice I'd made. My family attended all of them. As General Hayes pinned on my new rank, I felt the weight of everything that had brought me to this moment. When Marcus approached afterward, he was beaming. "Colonel Whitman," he said formally, then grinned. "I like the sound of that." "So do I." "I've been reading about what this means," he continued, "about the responsibility you'll have. I'm proud of you, Sarah. Really proud." 2 years later came promotion to Brigadier General and assignment to Pentagon Strategic Planning. The work was intellectually demanding, anticipating future challenges, developing capabilities to address them, making decisions in conference rooms that affected operations worldwide. My engineering background proved invaluable for understanding emerging technologies and their strategic implications. The highlight was leading a joint task force developing doctrine for military operations in contested environments. The protocols we created were adopted as standard procedure across all services. By the time I made Major General, my family's attitude had completely transformed. Marcus had become something of an expert on military affairs, reading defense publications and asking detailed questions. Catherine volunteered with veteran organizations. My parents had become proud advocates, introducing me as our daughter, General Whitman, with genuine pride. The most touching moment came from Uncle Richard, the same man who'd suggested corporate consulting approaching me with a prepared apology. "Sarah, I owe you an apology 15 years overdue," he'd said. "I thought you were wasting potential, too stubborn to see obvious opportunities. I was wrong about everything." He'd been reading about my career, understanding what general officer rank meant. "While I worried about your earning potential, you were building expertise that matters, leadership that saves lives, a career serving something larger than personal advancement." The call about promotion to 4-star rank came during my 3rd year commanding Army Europe. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs was direct. I was being considered for commanding general, U.S. Army Materiel, command responsible for equipping over 1 million soldiers worldwide. This position has never been held by a woman, he'd said. If selected, you'd be breaking barriers while taking on some of the most complex challenges facing the modern military. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? I thought about my entire career, the doubts, family pressure, moments of questioning whether I belonged, the gradual accumulation of experience and confidence. Sir, I've been preparing for that responsibility my entire career. The selection process was rigorous, but 6 months later, the announcement came. I'd been selected as the first woman to command Army Material Command, one of the youngest four-star generals in recent history. Marcus's reaction was everything I could have hoped for. 4 stars, he'd said. Sarah, do you understand how extraordinary this is? You're going to be responsible for equipping the entire Army. Every piece of equipment, every technology, every logistics system, that's your responsibility. I could hear the awe in his voice. You've built something that will outlast all of us, he continued. The policies you've influenced, leaders you've mentored, systems you've developed, they'll be protecting soldiers long after we're gone. That's not just success, that's legacy in the truest sense. Marcus's 41st birthday party was deliberately different. Smaller, more intimate, focused on family rather than business networking. When toast time came, Marcus stood with completely different energy than the year before. Last year, he began, I made a toast I've regretted every day since. I said something wrong and deeply hurtful to someone I love and respect. He looked directly at me. I want to correct the record. Our family has been successful not in spite of my sister's choices, but because of the example she's set. He turned to address the room. Lieutenant General Sarah Whitman has spent 20 years serving with distinction. She's led soldiers in combat, managed strategic operations most of us couldn't understand, earned respect of military leadership at the highest levels. He described accomplishments he'd clearly researched, using terminology showing he'd tried to understand my career. More than that, she's shown us what it means to choose purpose over profit, service over security, mission over comfort. She's built a life that matters in ways that can't be measured in quarterly reports. He raised his glass with genuine pride. Tonight, I toast our family's success, including Sarah, especially Sarah, who had the courage to define success on her own terms. After the formal program, Marcus approached me privately with a small wrapped box. Inside was a watch, simple, elegant, military in precision. The engraving on the back took my breath away. To General Sarah Whitman, leadership isn't about the path you take, but the difference you make along the way. Thank you for showing us what courage looks like. Your proud brother, Marcus. The promotion ceremony to 4-star rank took place at the Pentagon, with the Secretary of Defense presiding and representatives from allied nations attending. As General Crawford pinned the 4th star on my uniform, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. My family was there, including grandchildren now old enough to understand their aunt held one of the most senior positions in the American military. But what struck me was how they carried themselves not as people attending an obligation, but as family celebrating something they genuinely valued. During the reception, a young captain asked the question that had defined my career. General, how do you know when you're making the right choices? How do you balance personal goals with service requirements, family expectations with professional opportunities? I looked at her earnest face and saw myself 25 years earlier. Captain, the right choices align with your values and challenge you to grow into who you're capable of becoming. Sometimes that means disappointing people who love you, but don't understand your vision. I paused, thinking about Marcus's toast, years of family pressure, the moment General Hayes called me Colonel and expected me to act like one. But if you stay true to your principles and commit to excellence, you'll reach a point where others recognize what you've built, even if it takes longer than you'd like. 3 months into commanding Army Material Command, Marcus's daughter Emily visited my Pentagon office. 21, Princeton senior, facing the same pressure I'd felt to choose a family-approved path. I've been accepted to law school, she said, but I'm considering the Peace Corps, infrastructure development in developing countries. Dad thinks law school is obvious, but the Peace Corps aligns with your values and would challenge you to grow in ways that matter to you. I finished. We talked for an hour about career development, different measures of success, building expertise in areas that mattered personally rather than just professionally. Emily, the people who love you will always worry about practical concerns. That's what family does. But you're the only one who has to live with your choices. 6 months later, she joined the Peace Corps. Marcus had initially been disappointed but became supportive after conversations about the value of diverse experience. If it was good enough for my sister to choose service over conventional success, it's good enough for my daughter, he'd said. After watching what you've accomplished by following your instincts, I'm not betting against family members who choose their own paths. Looking back on a career that began with uncertainty and culminated in achievements I couldn't have imagined, I'm struck by how much my understanding of success evolved. Growing up, success meant meeting external expectations, family approval, social recognition, financial achievement. Military service taught me different measures: mission accomplishment, protecting people, building systems that worked under pressure. But the most important lesson came from Marcus's toast and General Hayes's response. That night taught me that success means having courage to define your own values and determination to live by them, regardless of what others expect. The young woman devastated by her brother's dismissal became a senior military leader whose decisions affect global security. The family disappointment who chose service over profit built a career influencing how the American military operates worldwide. Marcus's toast was meant to exclude me from the family narrative of success. Instead, it became the moment I understood I didn't need inclusion in someone else's definition of achievement. I could build my own. General Hayes's intervention, calling me Colonel and expecting me to speak with earned authority, reminded me that respect isn't requested or negotiated. It's earned through performance and claimed through confidence in your own worth. Every challenge, every moment of doubt, every temptation to choose easier paths was preparation for leadership where decisions really matter. The military taught technical skills, but life taught me that the most important battles are fought not with enemies, but with limitations, those others place on you and those you place on yourself. Today, commanding Army Materiel Command, I ensure American soldiers have equipment and support needed for safe, effective missions. It's work drawing on every aspect of my experience while carrying forward values, learned that difficult evening, speaking truth when uncomfortable, standing up for principles when alone, understanding that real success comes from exceeding your own expectations rather than meeting others. The journey from lieutenant to general wasn't just about military advancement. It was about valuing my judgment over others' approval, measuring achievement by impact rather than income, understanding that the best way to honor opportunities was using them for something larger than myself. When young officers ask about career development, I tell them about that night. Not because it was pleasant, but because it taught something essential about the difference between seeking approval and commanding respect. The moment you stop trying to prove you belong, I tell them, is the moment you discover you already do. That's the lesson Marcus unknowingly taught with his cruel toast, what General Hayes reinforced with her intervention, and what has guided every important decision since. Sometimes the most valuable gifts come in the most painful packages. Sometimes those who challenge us most directly help us grow most completely. And sometimes the best response to exclusion isn't fighting for inclusion. It's building something so meaningful that others ask to be included in what you've created. Marcus's toast was meant as an ending final judgment that I didn't belong in the family success story. Instead, it became a beginning when I found my voice and learned to use it. The best way to honor your family isn't becoming who they want you to be. It's becoming the best version of who you actually are, building something meaningful with your abilities and opportunities, having confidence to stand behind your choices even when they're not understood. 30 years later, I'm still grateful for that evening when Marcus forced me to choose between his definition of success and my own. I chose correctly, even if it took both of us years to understand why.